Yeah, as Greg said, I came to the Cariboo in 1963, and those were the days of real isolation. Even in 75, where this book is set, it was still pretty isolated. No cell phones, no internet. You know, if you can imagine it, you all lived it. So it was pretty isolated, and some of the people who had their medical problems were a long way from anybody else. Like, there was no doctor around, and it was like, Horsefly is 60 miles, right? And so it took quite a while to get in, and then a lot of times people came in the hopes they could get a doctor's appointment because they couldn't arrange it, and it was difficult for people in the past. So the flip side of that is they were always glad to see you, you know. So that was good. I did write a bit in my late 20s, just a little bit, and then published with CBC Radio, and then I didn't write for quite a long time. But my passion really is for justice, and public health nurses have opportunities to help create justice, and I found that came in my work, in all the kind of writings I did quite often, even in fiction. But I was in San Diego at a conference talking about my book, Teenagers and Suicide, and after the talk, a doctor from Hawaii came up and asked me, he said, where are you working now? And I said, well, I'm not doing public health anymore, I'm writing. And he said, oh, but you are doing public health. And I thought, yeah, that's true. And it just manifests, your own passions manifest themselves all over the place in the kind of work you do. Or you bring your passions to whatever work you do, I believe. I was really interested in the previous speaker's view on historical facts. It's so incredible to have all the many, I overheard someone say there are many lenses. And so I borrowed that, sorry, whoever's original thought that was, it was not mine, that there were many lenses to look at what happened in the past. And Whitney's presentation showed how you could mesh all those facts to get at as much truth as you can. And after getting this, deciding I was writing history, even though it was my history, it's still history, and I began to look at what are facts. And the way it was presented in the last presentation, it becomes clearer and clearer, I think, what the facts are. However, every record has a bias. So it has a bias in what you leave out or what you include or what you just don't know about. And so facts are really slippery in terms of history. It's hard to, you have to go with the best guess sometimes. Just go with the best guess and try and get as much collaborated facts as possible. So I and can't do that, right? What I remember is what I write. And whether my memories are accurate or not, I have to go with what I have accepted as my memory. So I have an author's note. What I decided to do, I recognized these things were happening as, is this really happening, or is this how I remember it? Or, if anybody has brothers and sisters and you start talking about what happened, if you have 5 brothers and sisters, you have 6 versions of what happened. And everybody's right? So, and I do have 5 brothers and sisters. So, and I'm never right, as far as they're concerned. So it's not that everybody's wrong, it's that you have just a different view of what happened. So it's sometimes really challenging to get what's right. So I put down this story is an account of this one. This story is an account of my life in the Cariboo between 1975 and 1976. As I did in my last book, I changed the names of many of the characters, sometimes putting two characters into one, and often trying to make them totally unrecognizable, especially the doctor I didn't like, right? Because I didn't want to get sued. Occasionally, just occasionally, I moved events from one year to another. The events did happen, but not in that year. For example, the flight to Pan Phillips Ranch took place some years before, and the medical health officer who appears in the book worked there in a different year. Because I don't want you to know who he is either. Occasionally, I put two incidents together that didn't originally happen together. Because I was a nurse in the community, I dealt with people whose problems included disease, mental illness, and suicide. I also met people who showed me kindness, love, and humor. The names we used in those days reflected the times, such as fireman instead of firefighter. My favorite thing about that was my dad insisted that councilors, town councilors, should be called councilmen. He said, they should be councilmen. They always were, right? Councilmen. It includes women. Just accept it. And I said, okay, Dad, why don't we call them all councilwomen? Would you accept that? He said, no, it's councilor. Okay. The terminology around the Indigenous peoples in this book is as it was in the 1970s. We do not use the same words today. I applaud the changes in the language, which presently is much more respectful than it was in the past. The term native could be respectful in the 70s, as it implied that the person was connected to the land and indigenous, or it could be used derogatorily. Indian was a misnomer and had pejorative connotations in those days, but it was used officially and extensively. The language was part of the prejudice of those times. Now we use Indigenous to try and eliminate as much culturally oppressive language as possible. When I worked in the Cariboo, I used the most respectful language I knew, and for this text have not editorialized or imputed modern terms. Some place names have changed since the 70s. Alkali Lake Reserve is now, Escatemic, and Sugar Cane and now, I know I'm not going to say this right, Tesla. I used the names commonly used at the time, but I recognize that they have changed. I also have an allergy to something in the air here, so sorry about that. I raised a son who was a member of the Gitxsan Nation and experienced prejudice as I stood behind him. I have done what I could to fight it. I had naively thought that prejudice would disappear as he got older, and the general public became more educated. But that didn't happen to the extent it should have. Racism is still strong, offensive, and debilitating. There are no more residential schools to abuse and brainwash children. Indigenous people are better educated, more able to use the law to their advantage. Governments are now aware that they must negotiate with Indigenous peoples for equality and peace in the country. But combating prejudice is an excruciatingly slow process. The Cariboo encompasses Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples who have a spirit of independence and hard work. Many still feel that the rest of the world is far away, and that those who live in the Cariboo must look after themselves and one another. I love living and working here. History is written through the understanding of the writer, and so contains the knowledge and limits of that writer. I relay here my experiences as I remembered them, entirely from my point of view, and I hope you enjoy a glimpse into those days. So that I put in the front, and I feel that when you're writing when you're writing a memoir, and you're putting the facts as you see them, you must set out the limitations of what you're doing and the terms in which you're doing it, so that your reader reads with that understanding. So I was going to read you a bit from the book, and then a PowerPoint, and then a little bit about the notion of what memory really is. So I had a hard time figuring out what I was going to read you guys, because what you're really interested in is Cariboo history, right? And I thought, well, I don't know how much. But anyway, I picked this one, chapter 3. I had just enough time to stop at my office, read my messages, and answer questions from Ellie, one of the 2 office clerks, before I headed for the airport. Ellie had worked at the health unit before I arrived years ago, and she knew everything there was to know about government forms. She was consistently pleasant and helpful, although clear on what was her responsibility and what was not. She still typed my letters and kept, oh, dream on, Marion, that was so nice. She typed my letters and kept my paperwork flowing. She wasn't my private assistant. She looked after all the 4 other nurses in our office as well. I appreciate her because my handwriting was not always legible, and my spelling was definitely creative. Drama didn't usually take place at the health unit, but this morning was an exception. I was standing at my office door when a young man climbed up the stairs to the office and leaned drunkenly on the counter. "I want my money," he said in a low voice. Ellie and Anne looked up. "I want my money," the man repeated in a louder voice. "I beg your pardon," Anne said. "I want my money," the man shouted. I froze for a second. Was he violent? Anne, who had started toward the counter, faded back to the side. Ellie looked up from where she was seated at her desk. "Yes," she said, polite as usual. I waited. Should I call the police? It would take them at least 10 minutes to get here. Should I intervene? I didn't want to approach him and get a fist in my face. I dithered, unsure. "My money," the man yelled, and with one hand on the counter, vaulted over it to stand in front of Ellie. He shoved his face at her. "Give it to me." I started toward them with no idea what I could do. "Do you want your welfare check?" she asked. "Yes," the man snapped, glaring at her. "You have the wrong office," Ellie said calmly. "You want the welfare office." He stood up straight and cocked his head. "I do?" "Yes, next block, the gray building." "Oh, sorry." He shuffled around the counter, nodded at me as he passed, and stumbled down the stairs and out the door. My heart rate went back to normal. I leaned on the counter. "Ellie, how did you know what he wanted?" "It's Welfare Wednesday." "Oh, of course. It was the once-a-month payday for those who needed government help." "Are you all right?" I watched her for a moment. She straightened some files on her desk and stood. "I believe I need a cup of tea," she said. She brushed past me, dignified and composed. I took a calming breath. If she could take that in stride, I could as well. I don't know how much time. Let's see how much time we have. Not a whole lot. We'll do the PowerPoint now, I think, and I might read a little more if we have time. But, okay, so this one. Okay, the ranch and the family. Now, this is, it's not called a wagon. Democrat, no, that is a wagon. It's not a Democrat. This is a wagon, and it came from my dad. And there's a story about the horse that pulled that wagon, unsuccessfully, I might say. And this is what I saw out my back door. And I think that's typical Cariboo, right? It was what first impressed me in the 60s when I came. I went out, kept stopping and take pictures like that. It was beautiful, beautiful. These are my children, and we are featured in here. Janice is the oldest, and Glenn is holding Benjamin, and David is the youngest. It's on the porch of our ranch house. And this is the plane, and that's me in the hat. This hat, where's my photo thing? The tallest one. And Janice and David, Glenn, me, David, Janice, Glenn, and LRG, the plane. And we were at Anaheim Lake there, I think. And we used to do a lot of flying around the countryside. And that's Janice on Cliff. The horse, what's the horse's name? I got it right in the book. And then the other horse in the back. Yeah, that's my vegetable garden right off the porch. And there's the corrals, Janice on the horse. I think that's Guy Collie. And this is Archie. Yeah, the ram. You meet him in the book, but he was, you had to keep your eye on Archie. And that's Janice and one of her many pigs. I don't have pictures of nursing because you didn't take pictures of patients, and you hardly took any pictures at all in those days. And there's David with his one and only pig. And that was my dad shearing a sheep. He was doing it with electric shears, and I used the hand clippers. And that's the driveway. I hear it was snowing in Fox Mountain today, this morning, yeah. Well, you can see it can get a lot worse than today, right? And that's me skiing with my friend Lois. I had Wednesday afternoons off, and she would come up and we'd go snowing around the ranch. I was skiing around the ranch in the snow. It was great fun. And that's sledding on the end of the, well, you all probably have all had experiences like that. Yeah. And that's LRG too, I think. And that's David. Now, he's untying the plane. We wouldn't let him tie it. But he's untying the plane, and he liked to travel with us. And that's the Caribou Health Unit. I think that was taken about a year before I got there.
That became the museum.
Yeah? Oh. Well, my office is on the other side. And that was the Marguerite, working out of town. That's the Marguerite Ferry, which I understand doesn't operate anymore. But I had a baby visit on the other side of the Fraser, so I popped over on that ferry. That was quite an experience. And that's the hospital. I think that was just built before I got there too. I did work there as a nurse as a ward nurse for a while, about a year and a half. And that's Williams Lake, I think. Looks like it, doesn't it? Yeah, pretty sure. And as you can see, that's LRG.
That's Scout Island.
Yeah, I thought so. Anyway, so that didn't take very long. That's good. 24, was I going to read some more? I think maybe I'm going to go into, if I have time at the end, I'll read a little bit. But I wanted to talk a bit about writing memoirs, because a lot of people who are interested in history are interested in writing their own memoirs. And I don't think you have to be a published writer to write your memoirs. It's really important, and as you could tell from the last speaker, it's important for people to write things down. Even if you don't think you're writing well, just write them down. So I was telling somebody yesterday that there's a program on Windows that it's called Speak and Write, and there's lots of programs that do this, but you can just speak and it types out your stuff. So if you're want to tell your stories, just tell it into the computer and let the computer write it. And then you probably have to edit it they do make they do sometimes do strange things to your words, but it's a pretty easy way of doing it. And it gets you started at least, get a story down. I think it's really important. The things we remember, though, to write about, the things we remember are events where we had to pay attention as we were experiencing it, and it probably holds some emotional impact. It has consequences, and it's probably a new event. If you have those 4 things, you're likely to remember it. So when I first went into nursing, those 4 things were every day, right? So I remembered a lot. I think that's why I remembered so much, because they had all those components. And we're unlikely to remember what we had for breakfast 2 weeks ago, unless it's the same thing every day. But because there's no consequence. There was no emotional attachment. It wasn't new, so you don't remember it. Your brain just says, don't bother. You do remember a car accident you had 2 years ago on a Monday because of all those things. And so that's why we remember it. And I think that even though our memories might not be totally accurate, I don't think we ever get the emotional part wrong, but that's just my opinion. That's not what the experts say. Memory makes a physical change in the brain, and what you see, you smell, you taste, you see, you hear, you touch, and you feel gets encoded in the hippocampus, and it gets revived into a stable pattern and then stored in part of the brain. Probably where we first picked up the stimulus, which is if you smelled it first, that's where it'll go in that part of the brain, right? And that's where you'll retrieve it. And the brain when you want to remember something, it searches around in the neurons till it finds the pattern you're looking for. Few people remember everything that happened to them, and nor do you want to, I would suggest. But most people remember those incidents they focused on and that mattered. And we remember differently. When I remember the past, I remember where I was, what the place looked like, who was there, what they said, and how they felt, and also how I felt. And not everyone remembers the same way. And some people remember smells they associate with the incident, or sounds that they heard at the time, songs that they attached to the event, context, that is, was it in the middle of a storm or a party, that, or a landscape. And some remember how they felt, and some remember what people said. Allergy alert. We have to accept that our memories may be inaccurate, amazingly inaccurate. Every time we retrieve a stored memory, according to the work of Lisa Genova, who's the last person I looked at for this stuff, memories can be, when we retrieve a stored memory, it's highly likely that we change the memory. We omit bits, we reinterpret bits, we distort others in the light of new information. I'm sure you know someone said, I'm not that kind of a person, I never did that, right? Because they aren't that kind of a person now, but they were then, right? And we then reform the memory and include the new view of it and store that in the newly created memory. And when we do that, we obliterate the old one. So we end up, I think we end up with a core of what happened, but maybe the details are different, or, and so apparently that's what we do. So historical facts are really slippery. And that's why work like the St. Joseph Mission's work, the way they're doing it, the methodology is just fabulous. That's really important to do it that way. Because one part is everybody's memories, who we refine and massage a bit and change a bit, but essentially they're probably correct. But they're one person's point of view. But you get, like, if all 5 of your siblings agreed on something, it probably was right? So there are ways of dealing with that, but they're pretty slippery. And even in journals, I'm doing that work on Florence Wilson and her life of Florence Wilson, and you think something as simple as her birth date should be accurate. So I have a birth certificate. Like, I looked up, I know her birth date, 1823. But if I didn't find that, then, and I didn't find it for a while, I had to rely on different things. She registered in brideship to go to Victoria in 1862 and said she was 39, so that's right. But then she applied for a grant, and she took 2 years off her age when she applied. It's in her handwriting, and she gives her birth date as 1825. So when she married her second husband, when she was 58, her marriage certificate says she's 48. She took 10 years off her life when she met that guy. I thought, well, maybe lying about your age was the thing you did in those days. But she's lying about her age. Like, I had to figure that out. If I just got the marriage certificate, I would have given her a different birth date, right? But you have to get more than one thing to establish. And I thought, if it's the bias of your own memory, or even government documents, or somebody else recording it, it takes a little work to figure out what is your best guess on that one. And sometimes that's all you can do. I guess according to the researchers in memory, no one can really say that their memories are totally accurate. But it's what we've got, and that's what we're going to deal with. And we're going to go with them with as much certainty as we can. And until someone proves me wrong on all these things, this happened, right? And so I excuse me. I found it a little unsettling to find that information that, hey, wait a minute, you mean I'm always changing the memory every time I pick it up? Like, I don't think so. But then when you write it down, it's less likely to change because you've got it written down. But even then, when you're writing down things, you're leaving out other things. So it's helpful to have more than one person. I wouldn't mind taking a few. What's our time? How much time do I have? How much time do I have?
At least 15 minutes.
Okay. Before I do a reading, I'll take questions because when I do a reading, there won't be too many after that. Yes.
I was curious about you were showing your plane, and I was kind of curious. One, if you were a pilot, and two, did you use it in your nursing, and did you get subsidized for using your plane?
Oh, what a dream. No, that was just a pleasure pilot, and I was a student. I had a student pilot's license. I felt it was necessary for me to know how to land that thing in case my ex-husband actually conked out or something. And so I took ground school and and did the 10 hours of instruction and got a student pilot's license, and we just use it for pleasure. And I don't think, he was a lawyer, and I don't think he deducted it ever. It was always just for pleasure. I did fly, and he was pretty possessive about the plane, though. And I remember Williams Lake's a lovely place to land. Huge long runway, and no obstructions in approaching it. Wonderful place to land. So I was going to land. It's my turn to land. And David and Glenn were in the back seat. And I said, well, I'd like to land. And Bill said, well, I don't know. And Glenn pops up, says, let Mom land. We get more bumps. That was pretty funny. Yeah. We flew, but he was the main pilot, and I just did the occasional takeoff and landing, and of course anybody can fly when once you're up there. The kids could fly once we were up there. It's straight and narrow. Anybody
Other
else?
questions?
I'd like to recognize there are quite a few nurses here today.
Well, we've been talking about abuse, and just wondering if you came across any types of abuse in the homes or within the families that you visited, and if so, if there was a protocol about what to do about that, if you talked to any administrators or social services or anything to follow up.
Yeah, I did come across a few, and when it was clear to me, like a child disclosed sexual abuse, the protocols were pretty easy to follow. I knew, well, I say easy to follow. The social worker I didn't want anywhere near the girl because he wasn't sympathetic enough. So I first, instead of reporting to the social worker first, I went to the mother first. She was a really good advocate for her daughter, and once she knew there was abuse, she took care of it immediately. Then I told the social worker. So sometimes you worked around things and then there was abuse in this book of a new immigrant, but there was the doctor told me he was worried and sent me in, and I couldn't prove it. And we had no way of helping. He was just going to be on alert to help rescue her if he needed to. But sometimes you couldn't. Another incident, I suspected, the principal suspected child was being physically abused at home. And I was lucky to get out of there without being beaten up myself. So I just reported back. I don't know what happened to that one. I couldn't do anything. And it's a really difficult call for children who are being abused by parents, because if in nowadays you have to report abuse if you know about it. And I did report it if I knew about it, but I know that my sister was a counselor in high school, and she's so difficult because you report it, and then the child breaks up the family, like the family breaks up, and in her case, they blame the girl that exposed it. And so if it's the father that's doing the abuse, he's the breadwinner in many families, and then what happens? And the kid feels responsible for it all. It's a really difficult one. Yeah, you have to think about it all. Yeah.
When you visited ranches as a nurse, what was the most common thing you treated on the ranches?
Well, whatever came up. TB sometimes, like supervising, making sure they had their pills. Because if they get on the pills, they're not infectious in those days. And we made sure we did the testing and we handed out the treatment. The prescription was done out of Vancouver, but it was standard prescription. So they just told us we keep the supplies in the health unit and we just take them out. And we make sure they take them every day. And that was like trying to do the education part of that. So there would be that, and baby visits on ranches would probably be the most common thing. Would be the baby visits. They did a lot on their own. I can still remember I'm in the health unit and a call comes in and I take it. You take all the calls that come. And my office was closest to the main office, so I got lots of them. And this call came in from a rancher out in Miocene somewhere who said, we're going on a trip and my husband's got this infection and we don't want to come in, we don't want to waste time, so we're treating it with this kind of penicillin. And I said, oh, it's for the horses, is it? She said, yeah. I said, it sounds fine to me. So, yeah, they did a lot of things of their own. They probably sutured themselves up, and I didn't even know about it. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about your style of writing, okay? Because I'm kind of pegging you now as not quite a historical writer, but more of a fictional writer. And I was wondering about your tone. I mean, I think that you're sort of a little bit more on the humorist side. What do you think of that? Do you think that's an accurate description? If I were to pick up your book, would I be laughing, or what would I be doing?
You'd be laughing and you'd be crying. But how do you get through life without humor? I want to know,
Oh, I think because you like to laugh and you seem to have an edge when you're telling us stuff. And I don't know, when you say things, I'm laughing. So I'm kind of wondering, I haven't read your book, so now I'm very curious to do so.
You did, I think. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
No, there's pathos in there. I make mistakes. I make medical mistakes. Every nurse does. Would you agree, nurses? Yeah, we make mistakes. Almost every one of us has done. And I don't, you just hope you won't kill anybody, And so if you weren't willing to make mistakes, you'll never do anything, right? So you have to sort of try and put things in place so you don't make mistakes. But inevitably, you're tired, something happens, and you do. So it's hard. Sometimes it's very hard to be a nurse, sometimes. And so I hope that's in the book as well, because I didn't want to think it was just all jolly out there. It wasn't. I saw really hard things and things that, you aren't aware. When you're young, you're not aware. You get older, you're only aware of some things. So you get older still, you're aware of more things. Then you get really old and you know nothing. You decide you're just so much you can't understand. But you try really hard. And whether I'm a fiction writer, they call what I write creative nonfiction, because as long as I set it out in the beginning what I'm doing, then you should be able to follow it. In the history book I wrote on the life of Miss Florence Wilson, that's coming out in I think a couple of years with Heritage, I write it in the first person. So I am, as if Florence Wilson's writing her story. And I can't know what she thought. I can't know what she said. That's not documented anywhere. So that's creative. But I know where she went, what she did. You know, I did all that. You know, she was on a shipwreck in 1852, and I know that, and I know the name of the ship. Writing that book was like writing history, because every paragraph I had to stop and check something. No, she wouldn't say sawed off. That was not a word until 1920. So she wouldn't have said that. So, or it says in one place that she was on the Black Sea, and another place she's on the Baltic Sea. Okay, which sea was it? Which island was it near? And it takes me an hour to find that fact. So it's a really long process. I'm writing a book of fiction right now, another mystery, and man, it goes fast, because it's all in my head, right? I don't have to look up much at all, you know, just topography. That's all I have to look up. But in a history book, there's tons to look up. What did she wear? Where did she pee? You know, think about it. She's on Catiline's mule train. The only woman. Try that one out, you know? I just thought, how did she do that? You know, you'd have to think of all these things. So I'm looking on all of these places. What were women's undergarments, basically, you know? And it's amazing how the difference, even in my lifetime, the difference, you know, I think about what I drove in 1975, Suburban, right? They were back-wheel drives, I'm pretty sure. In the snow, and man, no anti-lock brakes, none of that stuff. So, and you know, you just touch the brakes a little bit, you got on the gravel, you got in the snow, you hope someone would pull you out if you got stuck. And yeah, big difference in even just in driving. And cell phones? No, I mean, when you were out as far as my scene, I forget it. You know, you're on your own. Some people had phones, so you could trek into someone's house for a phone, but no, it was different. Yeah. You're welcome.
What prompted you to write your first book?
You know, I thought I was getting older, and I might forget all these things. And nobody would know what a wonderful country it was, and how wonderful the people were. Like, this whole attitude of almost everybody in the town as well, that there's those people out there in Vancouver who don't know what's going on, and we're on our own. And, you know, we did things for each other. I just loved that atmosphere. And I didn't actually realize that other public health nurses, well, actually, I thought there are other public health nurses who didn't have the same experience, but there are plenty who did. So I get all these information. I was so amazed at the response of nurses from all over the world that say, you know, in northern Alberta, it's like that now. And, you know, and with BC nurses, when I was on the, where are you? There, the BC History of Nurses group, I was on Zoom with them right after Always Packaganta came out. And I said, anybody got experience in the rural? Oh yeah, I was in Bella Coola in 1958. I thought, oh my God. I said, did you use those big 20cc syringes? I did. And we you know, you give these immunization, half a cc, to a little 2-month old baby, and you got to juggle hemostat, a forceps, right? To pick up the needle, to put on the big needle, and then to and everything's got to stay sterile. And I tell you. And I came from Seattle, where you had these disposable needles, right? And I was, ah! So she worked on with that for quite a few years. I only worked for about 2 months before we got disposable needles, but I still remember that. That was Myosine was my first experience with a clinic with that. Well, after I was trained I had experience in the health unit, and then my first time alone with it. Yeah. It was new, it was emotionally laden, it had consequences. It was unforgettable, yeah.
You probably talked a bit about it, but so did you trained in Seattle and then worked a bit in the hospitals. When you actually got into public health, how well do you think your education?
Well, to start with, my education, my Bachelor of Science, we talked about this yesterday at lunch, that when I had a Bachelor of Science and came here, you understand every nurse today has a Bachelor of Science. But when I came up here, I was the only nurse in the Cariboo that had a Bachelor of Science. Everybody else had a diploma. And in North America, only 8% of nurses had a Bachelor of Science. So I felt quite prepared for public health because I'd had a practicum in Eastern Washington among Mexican immigrants. And so I had a lot of experience in houses that were quite nice, but there wasn't a lot of money around. And so the nurse that took me around really taught me a lot about being careful about people's resources. Yeah. She'll invite you to have dinner, and it'll be chicken, but there won't, if you have dinner, the kids won't. So we will say we're just eating. And so she told me stuff like that and the practical ways of getting around. And I said, why are you weighing and measuring these kids in school? Because it's useless. It's not, and in terms of public health, it doesn't matter. And she said, that way I see every student, and these kids only come in and they're picking, parents are picking asparagus, and they're in this school for 2 months. So every year I want to make sure they're doing okay, and this gives me a chance to talk to each student. So she'd tell me things like that really were in education. So I did public health for quite a few years before I stopped and went and did hospital nursing, because I thought, I just want to see what that's like, because all the other nurses I know have hospital experience, and I want to be part of the tribe, right? So I did it up here, and I enjoyed it, but it was, yeah, I have lots of stories about there as well. But, well, the problem with the next book is, in spite of this notion that I might be a fictional writer, I can't actually make it up. So that's why I went to the history of Florence. I thought, no, I can't. This one back there, Craig.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then you can do the last bit of the reading.
No, I will have the questions.
Okay.
They can get the book.
Marion, no, I'm really thrilled that you're here. I actually received your newsletter, and I discovered you because I walked into the open book one day, and I got hooked on you as Emma Dakin. So I have read most of those books, and I was hoping that you had a moment just to say, how did you get into that whole section of your writing? And I'm just now reading Always Pack a Candle, so even though I live in the Cariboo, I have kind of come at it from your other series. So if you have a moment, I'd love to know how you got involved in the writing of the British Book Tour Mysteries.
I write the British Book Tour Mysteries under the name of Emma Dakin. And I did write quite a few mysteries for young adults years in the 90s. So I have, 4, 6, 10 books of novels for young adults and children. So I decided I wanted to write for adults because I read in that genre all the time, and I wanted to. In my master's degree, I went to England to my thesis on what is the nature of village. It was a lovely degree. You just did whatever you wanted, pretty much, and I really enjoyed the countryside and the English way. And my background is Scottish, so in English, so. I went, and I thought it would be fun to set it there, and always set a book of fiction where you want to go, so I set one there, and so I researched. I went every year to England for 6 years, I guess, researching the area where I set them. And so I got into that because I do love writing fiction, but and it teaches you a lot about pacing and foreshadowing and all sorts of writerly tools. And so I got into that, and I sold it to Coffeetown Press out of Seattle, and they've been producing it. But so I've got 6 books out under Emma Dakin. I've written the 7th, but I'm not happy with Coffeetown. And it seems like a good time not to have an American publisher. So we parted ways. But I have the 7th book written, and because you can't sell the 7th in a series, I may end up putting that out myself. But that's a lot of work, and I always keep putting it off. But it's done. So I can send it to my newsletter people on PDF if I want to, you know. So I think I'll probably do a sort of a limited one and send it out. But I got into that. Now I'm starting a different series, and I'll look for a different publisher. And this series that I'm starting, the Murder Mysteries, is set in the Nicola Valley. Yeah, I was talking to Jolene about it, yeah. Yeah, it's lots of fun.
Any other questions? Yes, Lauren.
When you were nursing as a public health nurse in the Cariboo, what was the status of informal midwives? Were there a number that you were very positive about and knew well, or was it uneven, or?
There were none.
Yeah.
There was one. She was there when my baby was delivered. She was from Britain, but she couldn't practice as a midwife. I wanted to be a midwife when I got my degree, but there was no real opportunity except in the far north for midwives in Canada. Now, they were in the States, and I did go, when I did a book on women's health in the 90s, I did go to Kentucky to the Frontier Nursing Service, and I went around with the nurses there to see what kind of work they did. And they had midwives. They also had nurse practitioners. And it was a very poor part in the Appalachian Mountains of the U.S. And because doctors couldn't make a living there, nurse practitioners and midwives would refer to specialists. They had their own hospital. They were really well endowed. The Frontier Nursing Service has been going for 100 years. And they educated nurse midwives, and they got degrees from Case University. So it started and now we have midwives. But that was late. It wasn't in the 70s. We had no midwives, or practice licensed midwives in those days. But I was all for it. I wanted to be one. But there was no way I could make a living at it.
I was really sort of asking more about unlicensed community women who'd come and help a woman on a ranch who was expecting, and you were off on circuit, that sort of thing. Was there a fair amount of that out there in terms of births? No.
The hospital was accessible by car, and they darn well wanted to get there. There wasn't very often that if there was a birth, it was, I had one where the girl was hiding the birth and went into the woods to have it. But most of the time, if the birth wasn't at the hospital, it was in the car on the way,
Right.
So those were, if there were any outside the hospital, that's the way they would have probably happened. And there wasn't an ambulance either when I first came here. Somebody had a station wagon. And I remember I was down at the dock waiting for a plane to come in, down on the lake, and the float plane was coming in, and then this float plane came in before the one I was waiting for, and they unloaded a guy, and he looked like I knew he had a fractured hip because his leg went in, you know how they do. and that's really painful. And although I didn't know what else was wrong with him, when I accident in the woods. And the guy took him off, and they put him on a stretcher, and the guy who was acting as the ambulance guy shoved a pillow under his head, and I just couldn't stand it. I took the pillow out and said, "Don't put a pillow under his head," and I think they put the pillow to brace his hip, right? And boy, was the ambulance driver, the station wagon driver was really pissed at me, and I just said, "Don't do that." But anyway, when they got an ambulance service, that was great. Yeah, you think about it, no ambulance. Can you imagine?
Marion, thank you very much for telling us about your books, your life, and the elusive nature of memory.